My name is Luis Figueroa. I'm the Legislative and Policy Director for Every Texan, and we are here in opposition to Senate Bill 1091. I just wanted to make 4 quick points. I know it's late, but we've been working on this for a number of years, and I just appreciate the opportunity to give a few thoughts. So first, I wanted to mention we are also representing the Post-Secondary Advocates Coalition, PACE, which is comprised of affected student populations, largely Latina and African American students. And we think it would be great if, as this conversation continues, perhaps in the summer in the interim, if we can include more affected students in these conversations. I think what they would tell you in those conversations is that solutions are probably not going to be found in tweaking the top 10%, but rather in tweaking recruitment processes, campus culture, and financial aid policies. So I think that they would be really interested in those conversations. Secondly, I wanted to point out that, as many of you all know, Senate Bill 175 in 2009 was a compromise bill where the University of Texas was asking for more discretion when they were hoping to get to 50%. Nowhere was it ever contemplated to go down to 30%. The reason was because, as was pointed out today, at a 30%, it reduces it to a top 2 or top 3% plan, in which most students would probably get admitted. I would in fact say nearly every student in the top 3% of their class would get admitted to UT with or without an automatic admission. So it would really swallow the rule here if we reduced it to that percentage. And I'd also like to point out that when we're looking at the data, that we shouldn't be starting at 2009. Really, we should be looking at when the top 10% plan was enacted, which, of course, goes back to 1998. That was the first year after the 1997 session in response to Hopwood. Because before the top 10% plan program was enacted, half of UT Austin's entering class came from just 64 schools from predominantly wealthy suburban districts. And so when you look at whether the impact has had on schools across the state, you want to go back to the original time period, and you may find that after 2009 compromise is when things started stagnating in terms of the diversity of the schools and diversity of the students. So it may have been the compromise that was the problem and not the actual top 10%. Real quickly, I just want to point on the ranking situation. The University of North Carolina, California, Berkeley, Michigan University, all state schools have much higher top 10% percentages at their universities and are ranked higher than UT Austin. We don't believe the UT Austin's ranking, which looks at factors such as student-faculty ratios, the endowment, library, those things will have more of an impact on rankings than impacts of the top 10%. And I'd love to get in a conversation with you, we may not have time today, about the issue that UT raised about their projections being off, that they have to announce 2 years beforehand what their projections are. We think we have an easy fix for that. If you all are interested in talking about that, I'm happy to do that. I know my time is limited here. But thank you for the opportunity. Ultimately, we just wanted to point out that we think the top 10% plan is working. We think that it's not a solution for everything, that we need to definitely look at other issues like recruitment, campus culture, and financial aid, but we should not swallow the purpose of the top 10% by reducing to a threshold of 30%. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I apologize. I had to step out for a constituent meeting and missed a little bit of the testimony this morning. But you brought up one of the issues that was going to be my question for one of the panels, and I know this is probably a little, obviously before the program began with 64 school districts, because I was going to ask some of the panelists, how many school districts of the 1,200 or now 1,100 school districts, are represented at your school? And when you see 5% of the school districts, or half the body represented by just 5% of the school districts.
That's right. So prior to the top 10%, so here we're talking about back in 2007, right. The entering freshman class in 2007 represented 865 high schools. Okay. So a vast increase from the 64 that came from prior. So we know in the initial stages of the top 10%, it dramatically increased the representation.
And you referenced some of the lawsuits, and I think if memory serves me correct, I did not serve on higher ed in the House. But, in some of the lawsuits we've had, they've referenced the top 10%, which right. has made the state's programs legal and not discriminatory.
That's right. And so in the Hopwood decision was originally when they struck down race-based admission, the enrollment numbers for African Americans and Latinos dropped to, really low numbers, and that's when we came up with this race-neutral top 10% plan in 1997 and implemented in 1998. And then later in Gruder v. Bollinger, they brought back a limited approach to race-based admissions. UT Austin integrated a called blended but don't end it approach, where they merged the top 10% plan and some racial considerations. Texas A&M did not bring back any type of diversity, racial considerations. So every university is a little bit different in that respect, but the blended approach at UT seems to be working. It's been held up in numerous attempts. You remember the Fisher case, UT v. Fisher, they tried to take it up. It was held to be constitutional in the Supreme Court. There's been subsequent litigation since then. So this approach has seemed to meet the constitutional mustard, while at the same time, addressing a lot of the diversity considerations, although more can be done in that approach as well.
Okay. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, I apologize.
Thank you.
Senator Zaffarine.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, sir. And I apologize for missing the other witnesses. I was at a meeting with the Lieutenant Governor, which is a
Important.
good opportunity to discuss issues like this. So my first question to you is, would race and ethnicity considerations as permitted under Supreme Court guidance be sufficient to recruit and to enroll students of color at the current levels if top 10 is substantially curtailed as it would be under this legislation?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. We've been working on this for a number of years, so I appreciate you making it back and asking that question, because I think it's a really important point. And UT addressed this a little bit in their testimony. The component of racial considerations under the UT plan is a factor of a factor of a factor. First they use the top 10, then they use the academic performance, which is comprised of GPA, then the essays, then they use, the other factors of like extracurriculars and those types of things. And then they have a special category called special circumstances. And in that category, they look at socioeconomic status, whether you are working, and then they look at race in one of those factors. So we do not believe that the racial consideration, diversity considerations, even at UT Austin, is any measure of a substitute for the top 10% plan. Because as Arteria pointed out, Dr. Arteria pointed out from IDRA, the numbers strongly suggest that when it comes to African American populations and Latino populations, both in the subjective holistic criteria and in the top 10% criteria, Latinos and African Americans are largely coming in and benefiting under the top 10% part.
But given those circumstances, why should we expect these statistics to improve if, in comparison to the top 10, if it is curtailed by this bill?
That's right. I don't think it would. And so we removed the top 10% or lowered it to such a low percentage as 30%, where only the top 2 or top 3% would be automatically admitted. We would find, I think, we would return back to the days where feeder schools would predominate the holistic or subjective criteria. Students from Alamo Heights or Westlake would, I think, start to fill in a lot of those spots where students were taking top 10% from the top 6 or top 7% plan. So I think, and this was alluded to in the testimony earlier by the campuses, the subjective criteria, the holistic criteria, is not a great substitute for the top 10% plan.
Thank you. You were here this morning, were you not?
Yes,
You heard the
Senator, I sure
testimony?
was, absolutely.
You heard all the testimony, and you heard about the statistics regarding the recruitment and retention of Mexican American students or Hispanic students and African American students. Do you have any light to shed on that? Why top 10 has been more effective for Hispanics than for African American students?
Well, clearly demographics have a part of that. There's no question that we have a lot of high schools that are predominantly Latino and smaller populations in African, but I think it's also important to point out that, as Dr. Arteria pointed out, that the small percentage of African Americans that are coming in are largely coming in under the top 10% plan. And so if we were to remove that portion or restrict it or limit it, we may even see even further drops on the African American population, which is a scary thought when we're only at 5% right now at UT Austin. So what we have found is that the Latino students and basically the top 10% students are performing very well at UT Austin and A&M, which is what UT pointed out and A&M pointed out. And so it's largely been successful for the students that have been able to capitalize but we haven't been able to recruit. And I think also campus climate and financial aid are factors that we need to look at to further build on the top 10% and racial considerations under the affirmative action plan at UT.
Thank you. Do you have any data regarding whether the students recruited under top 10% have underperformed at UT, at A&M, or at any other institution?
We have not. Everything we have seen data-wise has shown that they perform as well or better than students that are on the non-top percent, even students with higher SAT scores in terms of retention, GPA, and graduation rates. And I think the data has borne that out over the entire course of their top 10% plan.
Thank you. Is more discretion necessarily better in admissions?
I don't think so, and the reason for that is because there is a subjective criteria. You know, I call it subjective criteria, holistic criteria. You have biases when you have a subjective criteria, and we saw this in the celebrity cheating scandal across the nation. It wasn't just UT, but at all universities, where people were gaming the system, pretending to be tennis players or doing nefarious actions to game the system. That's not just that is not the only case. We also have the special tutors that will help you learn how to maximize your score on the SAT. We have people who will rewrite your essays. There are all these subjective criteria that go into the holistic criteria that can be gamed. But the thing that's hardest to game is your GPA and your class rank, and that's what makes it very objective. And it sends the message to the kids, and this is to me the important part. The kids learn that if they work hard and if they're in the top percent, they have a path to higher education. And that message really resonates with them, that regardless of whatever disadvantages they have in terms of tutors or how much money their school has, they know that if they maximize the opportunities given to them at their school, they have a path.
Thank you. How would graduating high school seniors be impacted by a statewide 30% cap?
It would, if, effectively what UT said, it was to turn into a top 2 or top 3% plan. We know that if you're in the top 2 or top 3% of your class, you're largely getting into any university you pretty much want. For the most part, top 2 or top 3%ers are going to have a range of options. And UT Austin has, over the years, has said that they don't even need it to be at that level. Top 2 or 3%, they would be getting in with or without automatic admission. I think UT at the time was, back in 2009, was asking for a 50% threshold, not even a 30% threshold. So we think at 30%, we would definitely be swinging the pendulum way too far in making it, basically nullifying the point of the top 10% plan.
So if we, the members of the Senate, are unhappy with the results of the top 10% over all these years, what suggestions do you have that we can make to improve it, specifically in terms of recruiting and retaining more African American students and more Hispanic students to the point that they will reflect the demographics of the state of Texas?
So one, I would say I think we need to incorporate students into that conversation. I don't know if I have all the answers here, and I would love to get more affected students into that conversation. But I think what they would tell you is a couple of things. I think one, they would say, a UT representative never came to my school. A UT counselor never told me that I have a chance here or that I have an opportunity here. I think they would also mention things about the campus climate. Am I welcomed at the university? Are there still vestiges of discrimination there? Do I feel comfortable in this environment? And then thirdly, I think this is the big one, it's financial aid, right? It is very costly to go to even a state school, and are we providing the resources to make them competitive, or are they getting better options at other universities outside of Texas in terms of financial aid packages? How competitive is UT and Texas A&M in terms of the financial aid packages in comparison to what they're getting offered out of state? So I think those are all factors that go into it, but I don't have all the answers, but I think if we incorporate some of these students in these conversations, we might find some other answers.